Today we're going to go over what's known in ASP.NET Core terms as identity. And identity is a way that, a simple way that you can allow for logins to your site so that you can make sure that someone's logged in before they can go and change information. If you think about it, it only makes sense. If you think about the things we've done so far, you know, is it a good idea to literally let anyone in the world access your website and add stuff to it? That's a recipe for disaster. So you'd want to control who gets to do what. And we're going to cover the simplest form of it, but it can get a lot more involved and complex than this. Depending on the time, we might go over some more advanced examples later on, but I do want to introduce the simple concept of authorizing people to do certain activities on your site. So I'm going to go and create a website or a solution, application, whatever you want to call it. One thing I do not like about this is the size of the screen, very small, but we'll do our best. I'll go up here and say File, New, Project. And what do we want? We want not all platforms, but we want doesn't show us webs. How about this? C#. Oh, there we go. All right, we're going to take, as we've done in the past, am I just missing this? Okay, I'm hoping this is a case of things just looking different on this screen. We'll see. I'll pick this one. Next. I don't know if this is the case or not. Let's go. Let's put it on the desktop. I'm hoping this is correct. If you haven't been able to tell, I'm really annoyed over the fact that they still have not fixed the room in BU, whatever that room is that we normally meet in. Here we go. Yeah. We want to create this, a web application project template for creating ASP.NET Core application with example ASP.NET Razor Pages content. That's what we've been doing all along. It just looks different on the screens I'm used to running it on. So I apologize for my frustration, but that's how it goes. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to change no authorization, and we're going to choose individual accounts. All right. There's other options that you can have. You can connect to users that have Active Directory, Microsoft Azure Active Directory, or Office 365. You can do Windows app authentication for intranet applications. But we're going to do individual user accounts, and these accounts are going to be stored within the application. All right. If you guys want to adjust the lighting, feel free to. But if you're able to see, that's fine as well. All right. Click OK. Click Create. And it does its thing. Shame on me for calling it Web Application 1. That's always frustrating when students do that. I guess I forgive you now, given that I did it. All right. Let's see. Let's run this and see what we have going on here. We can connect to the page or to the site rather. Remember, all I did different is when I created the application, I changed the authentication to individual user accounts. If you have problems running IIS Express, change it to the name of the application and run it. This has been a tough week. I don't know whether to give this more time or to cut it off. Oh, I gave more time. Don't ask me again. Yes. Yes. All right. Opens up a little shell script and it's going to run the web app. All right. So right now, notice we have a register and a login page. You can't log in until you register. So if we do this, if we type something in, we can't log in. All right. Even if we type in a valid email address. Since we have not set this up, since we've not set up any users, actually I missed a step. All right. I need to update the database. And I can do that by pressing this button or by the preferred method of going into NuGet Package Manager Console, and saying Update Database. Okay, now I should be able to get into login. If I type something in, tells me it's an invalid login attempt. Of course it is, because we haven't set anything up. But you can go to register as a new user. Remember, this is the simplest form. This just wants to make sure that they're a valid user. And you need to put in the email account and the password. So I'll put in mz@mz.com. For the password, unfortunately, you can't just do something simple as password, because the default is to verify that the password is of certain level of complexity. One non-numeric character, or one non-alphanumeric character, at least one digit and at least one uppercase. So I'm going to type in MZ 101 exclamation point. Okay, how about M lowercase z 101 exclamation point. All right. Now, because we're just doing this as a test application, we don't have any defined email service to have hooked to this. Therefore, it doesn't actually send anyone an email. If we were in a production system, we would have some email sender registered with our application that would actually send a confirmation link to our user. But we're going to pretend that it did. So we're going to pretend that this is what we got from the email. And I'm going to click here to confirm my account. My amount's confirmed. My account's confirmed. And I can go and log in now. And there we are. hello@mz@mz.com. Doesn't really do much though. All right. But it gave us a shell of something. Remember, the whole idea of scaffolding is it gives you something you can build upon. Now today, we're just going to stay with this level of authentication. We're not going to take it any further. I might talk a little bit about some things that can be done, but we're going to stay with this level of authentication. For example, when we register an account, we can customize this page to not just have an email address, but to have other information about the user as well. But we're not going to do that today. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to add some pages, and we're going to make it so that you cannot maintain the database unless you're logged on. So I need to scaffold something. So I'm going to go, and I'm going to make add a folder called models. And I'm going to go and just find a model somewhere online. And for laughs, I'm going to look for data annotations too. Okay. So I'm going to take this example of a class. And this is a class for a music application. And we have a public class for album. All right. So I'm going to go and I'm going to create a new class. I'm essentially going to go through the process that we did last couple weeks. Go through, create add a class. I'm going to call the file album.cs. Now, one thing that you should notice is you have difficulty if you name your pages folder the same thing as you name your model. So I'm naming the model album.cs. I will name the pages albums. All right, so it's a good idea to follow that convention. Otherwise, you get very puzzling errors. This actually, when it first happened to me, took me a long time to figure out. So I'm going to go and I'm going to copy and paste a lot of what's in the example. Some of these things we haven't covered yet. I am going to only take a portion of this. Some of the other data annotations we have covered though. So they should be familiar to you. So I'm going to get rid of that. I may have forgotten to copy another thing. That clears it up. All right. I'm going to make this guy required, the ID. All right. And I'm going to keep the rest of them. Display name, genre ID, or genre for genre ID, artist ID, error message, and so on down the line. All right. So I'm going to save this model. Now the next thing is a key point, because I'm going to scaffold this and create a scaffolded CRUD operations, create, retrieve, update, and delete. So I'm going to add a folder to here. This is what I'm going to call it, albums. And I'm going to click here. I'm going to start to do this, and I'm going to back out. I'm going to start here that I want to add a new scaffolded item. And I want the razor pages. Now, the model class, of course, is going to be album. But the data context class, we have a couple of choices here. If I hit plus, it gives me the data context name using the format that we've done before, right? The application name and then context. So if we do this, it will create a new context named web application one.context. And that's what we've done before. All right. However, if we click the drop down, there's already application DB context. So we can do one of two things. The application DB context is the database and database context where everything related to the users lives. All right. We can choose to add our tables to that context, or we can choose to create a new context called web application one context. So we have a choice whether to use one context or multiple contexts. Either one of them works, all right? But I'm going to add a new context because there's a couple of things you have to do when there's a new context. So I'm going to say, create this new context. Then I'm going to click add. It's updating some stuff, updating some packages that now that I need, that I didn't have installed already. I can see why people get frustrated working with this, because if one thing is off, it can make everything go off, but it is amazing how much this does on its own. Like, you don't have to download the packages on your own. It's smart enough to know that it needs those packages, so it goes out and gets them for you. Now you can go and you can update the packages if there's like a newer version, or you can uninstall things, or you can install things that you need that weren't included for whatever reason. But it does a lot of that already for you. All right, and away we go. If we look at our data folder now, notice we have two contexts. We have an application DB context and a web application 1 context. This is for all our application stuff. This is for all the user stuff. Now, if we had an application where we wanted to connect our tables with the login information, we would probably be better off combining those two and putting everything into one context. But in this case, I'm just using a simple authentication, so I'm just going to put things into two separate databases. Now, when you have two database contexts, what that means is anytime you do an operation, you have to specify which context. So if I type in update context, or update database rather, I'm going to get an error. All right. Even though it said the build succeeded, I got an error. Because more than one DB context was found, specify which one to use using the -context parameter. So what I have to do is, since I already have updated the other database, the database with the user information, okay. Moral of that story, don't drag around these windows. I still have my two contexts. I still have my albums page. So I need to update the applications database and not the users database. The users database, again, is application DB context. Web application 1 context is where the files for this specific application is going to go. So I'm going to say add migration context initial. No, context web application 1. And then I give it a name. So before we could just say add migration and then give a name of the migration. Here we have to say -context and then give the name of the context that we want to add the migration for. It's actually web application 1 context. Okay, now it succeeds and it doesn't give us any errors even. All right. Now I have to do the update database, which is the same. I have to specify which database I want to update. I was doing a little reading before this, and they stated whether you put it in one database or put it between two databases, again, is dependent entirely on the application. If you need information from the user table in your applications database, then make them one. Otherwise, it's okay to make them separate. If the user if the users are only used, if the user IDs are only used to log on. All right. Okay. Now, we've added these and we can go in and we can add an album now. We could if we added it to the navigation. Please add stuff to the navigation. And in this case, it'll be the name of our folder /index. So now we can get to this on the menu and we can call it up. If you don't add it to the menu, you can type it in usually by typing in / the name of your pages folder /index. But please add it to the navigation. So I could create a 2. As you see, this is incomplete because there's a gender ID, or genre ID rather, an artist ID, a title for the album, and a price. We click create, and there it saves it. We can go and view it. We can delete it. We can edit it. We can add another one. Now, as I mentioned, let's say this was some sort of catalog, like a catalog of music stuff, like the All Music Guide, where there are editors that are allowed to maintain it, but not everyone's allowed to maintain it. We would want to make it so that only authorized people were allowed to enter it and enter data, edit data, update data, or insert data or delete data. Actually, I said edit and update. Those are one operation. All right, so how do we do that? We do that very simply through a data annotation, except we put this data annotation in the page itself. So what pages do we not want the users to get into unless they're logged on? We don't want users to get into create, delete, or edit. We'll allow anyone to see the list of albums, and we'll allow anyone to see the details of it, but we will not allow them to create, delete, or edit. So I have to look this up to be sure. Here's a more advanced example where we can authorize depending on the role of the user. We have not defined roles. We have not customized it to include roles, and therefore we can't do it, but we can put the authorize in. It goes in the model. I'll put it in the create model first. And it goes right before the class declaration. Remember, our model is sort of like the controller in the model view controller model. So I'll put right here authorize. And it shows a squiggly line, which means we have an error. Why do we have an error? We have an error because we need to use the namespace that authorizes in. I'm going to show potential fixes. Control plus. And one of the things we'll say is, do we want to specify that we're using Microsoft ASP.NET Core authentication? We do that, and that clears the error right up for us. So now we run it. And we can still go in the list, but if we click create new, tells us we have to be logged on to do it. If I log on, then I'm allowed to go and add something. I can get to that page. If we're unsuccessfully logging on, it won't allow us to log on. So now I have to do that to every page in my every page that I want to restrict authorization. So I'm going to go copy and paste that code. To the delete. And the edit. Okay. Notice how some of these are in bold and some of these are not in bold. All right. The reason for that is because at this point in time, the ones that are not in bold, the ones that are sort of dimmed a little bit, are namespaces that are currently not being used. The authorization namespace is being used because we're using the authorize function. Web application 1 models is being used because we're using those models, and so on. So now all three of those pages that allow us to change the data in the database are restricted to only logged on users. So I can view the details of the page, but I can't edit it. Oh, I'm still logged on. It got me worried for a second. Let me log out. I can't edit it. Can't delete it. Can't edit do what? If you click the remember me box, it will store a cookie with your login information so that it will log you back on automatically the next time. All right. Let's look at a couple of things. I mentioned we have two databases created. Let's look at the Server Object Explorer and look at SQL Server. And here they are. we look in this one, it shows all the stuff related to the identity, the users. So if we view data, it'll show us the primary key of that table, which is a monstrously generated key. It shows us that the username, it made the same as the email address. Normalized username, this is a non-case sensitive, so it will make, it'll take whatever you've entered in, I believe, capitalize it, and then check to see if it's equal to this. That way, if I typed in capital M lowercase z at capital M lowercase z.com, it'll still work. And the password is going to be encrypted. And there's other things that we could have in there too that we could create. Could put in a phone number, other information. But what's in this database is the database that relates to the users and the identity. Now notice the name of the database doesn't match the database context, because remember, the database context for this database is application DB context. So it corresponds to this database, but the names are not exactly the same. Now, if we want to see the actual data where our albums are, it's in this table. This is useful because if you want to make some small tweaks to the data, you want to initialize some fields or whatever, you can go and do it. As a rule, though, we don't want to go in and add columns this way. We don't want to go in and add columns. To this table. Doesn't even allow me to add columns. Oh, there we go. We double click on that. Unfortunately, it allows us to go and add columns or change properties of the columns. That's generally speaking a no-no. Because remember, we have our database context created by our model in our application, and that has to match what's in the actual database itself. All right, if it doesn't match, you're going to get problems if you update the database. So do not, except under emergency conditions, do not go in and maintain the database this way. Do it by changing the model and updating the model. Then you update the database context. Now I want to verify what I told you before, make sure it's correct. If I run this, and I type in mz at mz.com. Well, did I type in my password correct? There we go. So even though I typed it in with a mix of uppercase and lowercase letters, it still works because it capitalizes all the letters and then compares it to the normalized value in the database. All right. Now you may have noticed something goofy in this album table. And I'm sure, oh, one other thing I want to tell you before I get into this. Let's look back at the database. Well, let's look first at the model, then let's look at the database. Here's our model. Albums ID is an int and it's required. Some of these other ones are required. Notice we don't have any data annotation that defines a primary key. Yet, if we go in and look at the database, it indicates that album ID is the primary key. How did it know that? It figured it out. It looks for things like the model's name, ID, or things just ID, and it uses that as the primary key. If there's a column that's named that, it would use that as a primary key. So it's smart enough to figure a lot of things out. All right. There actually are annotations you can put in for foreign keys too. And foreign keys are a little bit dicier because the name might not match up exactly or for whatever the reason. It could figure out foreign keys too, but it's a little more involved. And you have to do a little bit more work to come up with foreign keys. Sometimes you have to put in the annotations for them. That'll actually be our next topic. If you notice here, it might seem odd. We have, for our genre and artist, it's just a number. Why is that? Well, it's because presumably in this application, there would be a table related to the album table where there would be an album artist ID and a genre ID. So these values will have a number in them and not the not some descriptive name. We're going to start off after spring break, which next week is spring break, but we're going to start off after that talking about when you have more than one table. Because so far all our examples have been one table, or we did have one with two tables, but we really didn't link those two tables together. So the week after spring break, we are going to start doing things like foreign keys and relationships between database tables and so on. So that's what you have to look forward to. Does anyone have any questions? All right, that's all I had for today. Thank you very much. See you in a couple weeks.